A new mid-season update means new balance changes for the game, and boy did Blizzard cook up something very spicy. Coming straight hot off of the Moana meta, I'm sure that people are going to enjoy the changes that the game is getting, and the fresh new meta that it's probably going to bring with it. That was sarcasm if you could not tell. I think the meta's going to be worse. Somehow. So to go over the changes, starting with Mauga. This might be a hot take, but I don't think these changes are nearly as bad as they might seem. I was expecting like a nuclear bomb to be dropped on Mauga, Moana 2 to be completely cancelled, Disney's never making another movie ever again, but no, I still think he'll be pretty fine. He's losing 50 armor and getting it replaced with 50 health, which is fair. It's still much better than he was at launch. 200 armor, still a pretty good amount for a hero like Mauga to have. The next change was his chain guns, getting the ammo decreased from 350 to 300, which I really don't think is that impactful. He had way too much ammo before. If you were just using one gun at a time, you could basically fire for 20 seconds straight before you had to reload. It was kind of wild. Only getting it decreased by 50, he still has a lot of ammo. The really substantial change that he's getting is to cardiac overdrive. The lifesteal is being decreased from 70% to 60%, which honestly isn't too bad. He's not getting any form of damage decrease, so he's still going to be able to heal himself for a ton of health whenever he has it active. But the big nerf is that the cooldown is being increased from 10 seconds to 12 seconds. And this is really important because this just makes the period of vulnerability for Mauga much larger. He was basically only able to sustain through everything when he had cardiac overdrive active, and without it he would kind of just fall over and die if you put enough pressure on him. Usually when I play tank, I usually play Junker Queen right now, and I honestly preferred playing against Mauga to playing against Roadhog, because with Mauga, if you bait out cardiac overdrive, he's not that great, and you can kind of just use all of your abilities, run at him, and blow him up. Roadhog, on the other hand, you couldn't really bait out his vape, because it's a resource that he can use whenever he wants to. Unless he decides to just waste the entire thing, he's always going to have at least a bit of it to just completely negate the damage you deal to him, and also heal back up. But back to Mauga, he's just going to have a much larger period of time where he is vulnerable to being out-pressured and killed when he does not have cardiac overdrive, so the cooldown is probably the biggest nerf on here. Kate's fight getting a nerf where Mauga no longer gets infinite ammo. It will reload his chain guns at the start of the ultimate though, so I don't really think the infinite ammo is that important. Simply because, as I said before, he has way too much ammo. Even with his reduced ammo count, because Cage Fight reloads his gun, if you just hold down fire on both guns, the ultimate will end right before you run out of ammo. So you're still basically going to be able to just hold down both guns for the entire duration of his ultimate. You're just gonna have to reload afterwards. It is still a nerf, but I mean, like, usually if your ult ends, you killed the person inside or the several people inside and you're winning the fight anyways. So not a super impactful nerf, at least in my opinion. And then lastly, from Mauga, Berserker passive, the overhealth conversion rate is being decreased from 60% to 50%. Again, kind of like the lifesteal chains, I don't think it's going to be that important to him. He is still going to be able to generate a ton of overhealth by dealing critical damage. It's just that now he's going to be generating about 20% less overhealth. So he's still going to be getting a lot of it though. Skipping Orisa for a second because it's important and going straight into Roadhog. Roadhog is seeing a nerf to take a breather, which I actually think is pretty good. Roadhog was kind of the dark horse of the tank role before Mauga came out. Like, Roadhog was actually doing super well in terms of win rate and performance in ladder. But then of course Mauga came out, and like all the other tanks, Roadhog just got sent to the Shadow Realm to never be heard from again. Honestly, more so than other tanks, Roadhog just kind of gets absolutely destroyed by Mauga in most cases. But with Mauga finally being nerfed, I think it's only fair that they nerf Roadhog, and I think that this is the best way they could have done so. I don't think they need to touch his damage. Take a Breather was just insanely good at allowing Roadhog to just never die under any circumstances. And it's still going to do that. Take a Breather is still going to give him 40% damage reduction while he has it active. It's just that now he's not going to be able to spam it as freely as he could before, and the amount of health that he's able to recover is going to be a bit less. It's not a massive nerf, but it's definitely a tweak in the right direction, aimed at the ability that I think is easily the one that needed to be altered the most.
Peter, the horse is here.
Now to address the horse in the room, Orisa. Orisa got gigabuffed. Orisa is just going to fuck now. Like, full on go horse girl go kind of energy. I feel like people forget that the last time we had horse meta in Overwatch 2, one of the biggest reasons we got horse meta was because they gave Orisa 10 more meters of range. They just gave her infinite range. She has no damage fall off anymore. Just to visualize how insane that this change is, I of course don't have access to both clients, so I can't really record what it used to look like, but I can certainly simulate it by tweaking the damage values. But this is what Orisa's range damage was like before. Not that great, right? This is what her range damage is now. This horse will fuck you up from 10,000 feet away. You are never safe now. So my prediction is that Orisa's going to destroy the game. Actually, that's a little bit dramatic. She's going to be very good, just on a personal level. Probably just the strongest state that she has been in since Overwatch 2 launched. And if you're wondering why they gave Orisa these buffs, it's because she's kind of been straight garbage tier for like the last 4 seasons. She's a character that was basically immortal, but she also didn't do anything because of her fall off damage. That's kind of why, as the moment they buffed it, she was actually relevant. I don't think that she was broken at that state. I just think that people didn't want to try and find counterplay to her, and maybe the counterplay that just didn't really exist in the state that Overwatch was in back then. But compared to back then, Overwatch is in a very different state. We have heroes like Bastion that are really good. People have just realized the value in several other underutilized heroes, and several other heroes have been massively buffed since then. Like, we have True Damage Winston now. So Dive could be a good answer to Orisa, just because she's a hero that survives off the backs of her supports. That's how she's immortal. You cut off her access to the supports, or you just straight up kill the supports. The Orisa's still going to die. It's kind of why she was so bad, because she couldn't do anything, but she couldn't die. But then the counterplay is just that you either block off the supports, or you just kill them straight up. But now Orisa's going to be able to do a little bit more on her own, and actually have value as a character beyond just being impossible to kill. And then on top of that, they buffed Fortify specifically against Mauga, so that Orisa could no longer be critical hit by Mauga. So with Mauga nerfs and Orisa buffs, I think that Orisa might be a pretty good answer to Mauga, just because you can now use Fortify when he uses his Cardiac Overdrive, and you can kind of just cancel out a lot of the benefit that he gets from Cardiac Overdrive, just because you cannot be critted by his crit gun. And of course, not taking the critical damage reduces the amount of health that he's able to restore from his lifesteal, and kind of makes his survivability much worse. But we'd really have to see what happens in the game. Mauga meta just kind of destroyed the meta for a little bit, so who knows where the meta will be at once all of the dust settles after Mauga is now a much more reasonable character. Next up for the DPS, which I actually think have some very exciting changes. One of them does. There's only 2. It's not that exciting. It's just Sojourn. It's just I think the Sojourn buff is really good. So starting with Sombra, because it's just really a quality of life change. The grace period where stealth can be cancelled immediately after entering it has been increased from 0.5 to 0.75 seconds, just so that if you don't do anything for a while and you enter stealth on accident, but you actually want to fire your gun or something, you don't just have a massive delay before firing it. And now the grace period is a little bit longer, so it feels better for Sombra. Cooldown now pauses at 1 second while capturing or contesting objectives instead of 1.5 seconds. And cooldown on respawning decreased from 1.5 seconds to 1 second. So small buffs to just make playing Sombra feel more smooth and feel better when you're entering and exiting stealth. Good changes. Now Sojourn has one change, and that is that her railgun energy will no longer decay below 25%. Now Sojourn is a character that's actually doing pretty well, partially just because of the AFK tank meta where both tanks just stand AFK and look at each other, making it so that Sojourn can very easily farm rail off of the enemy tank and then just go, murder someone with it. But outside of the AFK tank meta, I don't think Sojourn was performing nearly as well. And I think that this is actually a really good change for her. It's not going to increase her power level where she's strong, like giving her faster rail charge or giving her more damage on her rail. Rather, it's actually a very interesting change because it gives her strength somewhere that she was previously weak, which was between fights when she doesn't have anyone to build rail off of. And she was kind of weak between fights because if you got the jump on her, she just wouldn't have her rail available. Now that it stops decaying at 25%, you kind of have a very interesting interaction that she didn't have before, where she's able to walk around between fights and just always have this 25% charged rail on her, which deals 55 damage. It's not a lot, but it's a pretty decent amount. And I think it adds a rather interesting dimension to the character, where near the end of a fight, normally you just use your railgun on anyone because if you don't use it, then you just lose it. But now you don't lose it and it instead will stay at 25%. You can then hold on to that 25% and have an easier time building it up the next time you're in a fight and can build up your rail, which, a decent buff there. Since realistically it's something that's only going to have an impact the first time you build up rail in a fight, it's not going to be super strong or impactful, but I think the real strength is going to be that you can just carry around a 25% charged rail at all times. If you get jumped by a more mobile character between fights, you can reasonably hit them a couple of times to get that rail up a bit and then use it to try and finish them off or force them back. You're reasonably able to take a fight as Sojourn in these situations instead of just trying to slide back to your team, which is normally what you had to do. This change actually adds a lot to Sojourn. If you think about all the situations that you could actually use, a free 25% charged rail, and it's not like it's broken, it's not like she's always going to have that 25% charged rail. It's something that you have to build up first, but then instead of, wasting your rail if it's at 90% or something, and you don't have a good target, you could just let it decay so that you get that 25% for the next fight, or you have it for between fights. You can use it if you're in a tight situation and you just need to, deal 50 damage to a tracer in order to force her back, or force recall, or just give yourself some breathing room. I don't know, basic change, but I feel like it actually gives Sojourn a lot more strength in areas that she was previously lacking in strength. Now for support, starting with the non-winners of the support role. Starting with Ana, who just straight got nerfed. Biotic Grenade, the effect duration is being reduced from 3.5 to 3 seconds. Just another band-aid nerf to anti-nade until they can actually do something with it, probably. Hopefully we can get a complete rework of anti-nade soon, like in, Season 9, because realistically I don't think it should be too hard because you don't have to rework the entire character, just like this one ability, please. But this is just like a band-aid nerf until then, I guess. Next for DeathWeaver, minor buff to Thorn Volley, projectile speed has been increased from 70 to 80 meters per second. And probably the bigger buff, his pedal platform can no longer be pierced by piercing projectiles. And this is kind of important for certain matchups, especially against, tanks like Reinhardt with Fire Strike, is that pedal platform didn't offer you that much protection when Reinhardt can just kind of throw a Fire Strike at it and it'll basically hit you anywhere if you're on top of the pedal. So a pretty good change there. And now the real winner of the support role is Illari, which is kind of strange because I know they said they were going to buff her, but I was expecting, like a minor buff to her pylon, like maybe reduce the healing a little bit, but decrease the cooldown by a couple seconds or something. But no. Instead, her primary fire charge is no longer paused by secondary fire or channeling Captive Sun, and she gets more ammo. The big thing is that her primary fire charge is no longer paused when you are healing. This gives her so much more room to deal damage and heal and swap between the two effectively. Since before, whenever you healed, it would stop the charge on your primary and then you wouldn't have a fully charged primary. Now you can very easily weave between healing and using your primary fire, so her damage output and healing output are going to just be much better than they were before because they flow together a lot better. The ammo increase, I think, is kind of negligible because he already had a lot of ammo for a character that has a very slow fire rate. I mean, her fire rate varies because you can fire your gun at any point in the charge, but realistically you're almost always going to be wanting to fire it when it is fully charged, which means you can fire it once every second. So with 14 ammo, she was already able to fire her weapon at full charge for 14 seconds straight, which is a lot. Buffing that up to 16 I don't think does that much for her. And that is not all she got, because Captive Sun also got Gigabuffed. Now using it now fully reveals secondary fire resource and resets overheated status. So if you use too much of her healing and it gets overheated, it now just fixes that when you use her ultimate, and it will also completely restore your resource. Pretty good, nice quality of life change. Now, the really big thing is that they removed the damage fall off penalty on the Sunstruck Explosion. Now, this is kind of massive considering the range that the Sunstruck Explosion has. Now, if you're wondering what the damage fall off penalty on explosions are, you can think of it like Ferro Rockets, how if you get a direct, it does max damage. If you hit someone and they're just barely in range of the explosion, they take a reduced amount of damage. Most projectiles in the way work like this. The one exception in the game, aside from Captive Sun now, is Echo Sticky Bombs. How Echo Sticky Bomb work is, if you are in range of the explosion at all, you take the full damage. Captive Sun now works the exact same way. If an ally gets detonated, if you are even barely in range of the explosion, you take the full 120 damage. This ultimate is now a lot more dangerous, especially to people who don't get hit by it, because the Sunstruck explosion radius is pretty damn large, and now if you're anywhere in that radius at all, you will be taking the full 120 damage when the target explodes. I can't really demonstrate how the old explosion worked, but you can see just how brutal the new one is with how far away someone can be, and they're still going to take the full 120 damage if they're standing next to an ally that does explode from the Sunstruck effect. Before, this ultimate was mainly only lethal to people who had the effect on them, but now it's going to be lethal to basically everyone on the enemy team, because if they make the mistake of getting nearby someone, they're going to take a lot of damage, and they're probably going to die from it. So that's it for all of the balance changes for this time. In terms of the meta we're getting from this, I think there's a good chance that Mauga is still going to be playable. He's not going to be dead. It's just going to be easier to punish him for being a dumbass, which I think is good for the game. You will now need to use a full 2 brain cells when playing as Mauga instead of having to just use 1. And Mauga being good keeps Roadhog in check, even though they did nerf him. He was still like a really good tank before Mauga came out. Really underrated. Kind of the same way that Mauga was like free GM if you just, played him and you had a KarQ pocket. Roadhog was kind of the same way. If you had someone who could hit a hook as Roadhog, which isn't the most difficult thing to do with how big the hitbox is, it was very easy to climb on him just because of how much sustainability Take a Breather gave him. But now Mauga's still probably going to be a pretty decent pick, probably be a good counter pick against a Roadhog. Orisa's probably going to be a pretty good pick against Mauga. A lot of stuff is probably going to be a decent pick into Mauga. Barrier tanks that can stop him from getting his lifesteal off of his passive and off of Cardiac Overdrive will probably be good. More vulnerability means that heroes that want to play fast and brawl like Junker Queen and Reinhardt would probably be better against him, because you can just use your barrier against Cardiac Overdrive and then just go ham on him when he is out of Cardiac Overdrive. It really just depends. There's always the chance that new Orisa could just eat up the meta, kind of like Mauga did when he came out. But it'll be very interesting to see, because Roadhog could be pretty good against Orisa, just because without Fortify, you can kind of just hook her out of it. Javelin Throw isn't nearly as good against Roadhog now that Vape is on a resource meter and not just a cooldown that she can immediately cancel. Roadhog's ult kind of just completely invalidates Orisa ult. Roadhog just kind of has more sustained damage than Orisa does now. Not as much range because they just gave Orisa infinite range now, but still much better, and you can press her out Fortify. After Fortify, you try and hit a hook her in, kill her, use Take a Breather to just vape your way through life. Out heal both of your supports, because that's just what Roadhog does. I've seen a lot of games where the Roadhog just straight up has the most healing on the entire team. It's wild just how good the new Take a Breather is, and I can easily see why they're nerfing it a little bit, but I feel like Orisa and Roadhog might be the centerpieces of the meta this time, or it could just be Orisa. I don't know. I believe in the horse way too much. I think that giving her infinite range is a ton of power, especially considering that she actually deals more damage right now than she did during the initial horse meta. So I believe in the horse. A lot of my money is in horse stocks right now. With the damage, I feel like Bastion, Soldier, just high DPS output heroes are going to be played because they would be good against the Orisa. Alternatively, you could see dive work as well, since you can just go around the horse, get to the back line, kill the supports, and then without the supports to be constantly pocketing the Orisa's just going to die. Sojourn could also still be a very strong pick because Orisa and Hog are both also characters that you can very easily build rail off of, and then she did also get the buff to railgun, letting her always keep that 25% on her. And then for supports, I feel like it's probably going to be like Baptiste, maybe Lucio with dive. Brig is probably still going to be a very good performing pick in this meta. But I'd say especially BAP with the Orisa being the central tank. Amplification Matrix goes hella hard and is one of the best ultimates in the game. Ana will still always be great if you're able to hit sleep darts. She's just seeing a bit of a decrease in power because nade isn't going to last as long, but it's still just going to be really brutal whenever you do land it. It just depends on if with the tank, if the DPS picks end up being dive oriented or more spam oriented. If you have spam DPS, I think that Zenyatta could be a really good pick, but if the other team usually runs flankers, then I think Brig might be the better pick instead, because Zenyatta might struggle, especially against Orisa, because the horse is going to have some range to her now. And yeah, that's it for this video. Just wanted to talk about the changes, because I think that Mauga's isn't that bad. Orisa's getting gigabuffed in a very big way. Sojourn's change I think is a lot more impactful than a lot of people might think, and more importantly, now that Orisa is actually able to do something, it'll be curious to see how that impacts the meta overall. Of course, it'll kind of be hard to speculate on what the meta could be, just because of how Mauga has had a chokehold over the meta for the past month. So yeah, thank you for watching, please like and subscribe, and until next time, see ya.